Welcome back to the Sports Complex on a Thursday afternoon. On the show today, we will get into the big news from the 40 Acres. Another returning player. We're down to one who has not made an announcement. Maybe he'll make it today on the show. It was definitely an eventful day on the show yesterday. We will also give you the breaking news of another legendary coach. Not going to be coaching where he was at last year, but I don't think this one's retiring. We'll get into that. Some NCAA basketball. It was another crazy night. The madness is already happening in NCAA basketball with more big upsets last night. We'll get into that. Getting a little NBA talk as well. The Warriors are in trouble, and we'll get into that. Patrick's Big Fat Poll of the Day. Some more sound from Hook 'em Up. A little replay from this morning's show. Some good stuff they had there. We'll get into that. We'll get into the Bama job and who is going to be taking over one of the biggest positions in college football. Set up for success, but a wrong move and a wrong hire could set them back. We'll get into that. We'll also get into our NFL. We'll get into the coach who is no longer at his spot anymore. We'll get into some playoff predictions, some injuries, and some teams playing overseas. All of that and a whole lot more, including your text messages. 512-447-3776 is the text line. 512-447-3776 is the text line. You guys drive the show. I just try to keep it on the rails, and that was yesterday. We kind of threw out the outline for a little bit of the show and just went with what you guys on the text line. You guys were the ones to alert me that Nick Saban had retired from football. And we've seen a retirement now. We have seen an elevation into for Pete Carroll, an elevation to where he's taking over an advisor role, and then we have now seen a coach parting ways. I believe they're all phrased differently. They all seem different, but all of those have already happened. But let's lead off the show with the best news at Texas today that we found out about one of the two remaining players. We did not know if they were going to be declaring for the draft, if they were hitting the transfer portal, which none of us expected, or if they would be returning. And Quinn Ewers has made his announcement today. I will let him make the announcement. This is what he posted on social media.
Dear Longhorn Nation, ever since I was a kid, I've dreamed of playing quarterback at the University of Texas. I couldn't be more thankful to all my teammates and coaches, and I'm beyond grateful to be in the position that I'm in. God has shown me who I truly am these past 2 years that I've been here. And through the ups and downs, these fans and this university has always had my back. And with that being said, I'm coming back. Hook 'em.
Quinn Ewers putting that out, writing a letter to whoever, but on his social media today saying he is returning to Texas next season. Big news for recruits, for players in the transfer portal who may be looking at, whether or not you felt like you were going to have a top guy. We know Quinn Ewers was already believed to be coming back, so he was the odds-on favorite, tied with, I believe, Jalen Milroe for the Heisman Trophy going in the way too early list. And we know he was up there last season and didn't finish up there. So it doesn't mean anything in the Heisman Trophy, but it does mean for Texas to bring in someone with experience. We know the jump he made through last season and then last offseason, the jump he made in progress and being able to read defenses and make decisions and make throws. We know what that difference was. We know what the difference was through this season and coming back from an injury and then building back up and playing in big games. Coming up a little bit short. It's not his best game in the college football playoff, but he's coming back is big news for Texas and Texas football. Especially when, you're still looking at that transfer portal 30-day window. We'll get more into the Nick Saban stuff in the 5 o'clock hour, but they do have a 30-day window where the transfer portal is now open in Alabama and a lot of good players there. And if Jim Harbaugh, if the rumors are to be believed that he may be done at Michigan, there will be a 30-day transfer portal opening in Michigan. And to have a guy like Quinn Ewers to try and go out and get some more guys to go repeat and get back to the college football playoff next year when it's a 12-team college football playoff, that's a realistic goal with the Quinn Ewers. And with Arch Manning, we may get there as well. But, and I know that there's all the clickbait and now everybody is trying to go viral or trying to get their tweet to stick out by saying, well, now Arch is definitely gone. This has all been discussed. None of this is new news. I think that all of this discussed, it also leads you to believe that Quinn Ewers has talked to Sark and that Quinn Ewers has had the conversation of just making sure before I say I'm coming back that you're staying and not going to Alabama. And again, we'll get into that, but the reports are that he's staying at Texas. They're renegotiating a extension right now, and his agent is also Saban's agent, is also Dan Lanning's and all of that. So, but the thought is this will help bring Texas a lot more stability in an offense with Jay Witt and JT Sanders and Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell all leaving. That gives you a little bit. Jonathan Brooks, you didn't have him at the end of the season, but he is also going to the NFL. All of those, to have all of those walking away, definitely leaves you with a bigger look at what Texas and a better look at what Texas could be next season, where they can be to bring him in. It gives Quinn Ewers another shot to learn. It gives Quinn Ewers, now that he will most likely be your backup quarterback, that Quinn Ewers now gets to go. I mean, Malik Murphy played 2 games. Malik Murphy came in at points. You hope that Quinn Ewers will be healthy the whole season. It just doesn't happen a lot in college football these days. So Arch will still be able to be a part of this team. Arch will still have to be getting ready. He'll be getting better reps than he got last year. He'll be getting more reps with the 2s instead of where, he was sharing reps with Malik Murphy a lot and doing reps with 3s and not necessarily the 2s. He will move up into that direct support. We need you in case of emergency break glass guy, Arch Manning. But Quinn Ewers returning is big for Texas. It's big to show the stability of the program when you do have a lot of guys walking out. And it does leave now that Jahdae Barron is your last person that I've seen that has not decided or not stated yet. He may have decided where he is going to be going, whether it is staying at Texas, going somewhere else, or going to the NFL draft. Most likely you would assume going to the draft or come back. But a lot of those guys in the secondary moving. Jahdae Barron, you wish him the best, whatever he decides to do. But that's a lot of turnover in the secondary. So as a Texas fan, you may hope that he comes back next year. But whatever he decides to do is good for him. But big news today, Quinn Ewers is returning to Texas next season. That is big good news today. So want to get that out of the top of the show. We'll hit that again at the 5 o'clock hour as well. Let's get into some basketball talk, though. So we try to get into basketball early, and then we'll keep going, and we'll get into some football and keep pushing and get through the whole show. Whatever you guys want to talk about, we always put you on there. NCAA basketball last night was a crazy night to watch basketball. I was watching a bunch of different games throughout the night, trying to watch some NBA too, but really the college basketball was top level last night. In the Big 12, we saw number 3 Kansas be the next juggernaut to get knocked down, the next top team to get knocked down. Of course, on Tuesday, we had number one Purdue get blown out by Nebraska, or get beat pretty badly by Nebraska. Houston, number 2 Houston, another Big 12 team, loses to Oklahoma State, or they lose to UCLA. Oh, I can't remember who they lost to now. I'm completely off my mind on that one. Iowa State. Forgot there for a second. Iowa State. And then number 3 Kansas lose to UCF. This is a game for Kansas where their offense gets slowed down. That Big 12 defense came in, and I'll bring it back to the Texas in a minute. But number 3 Kansas lose 60-65 to UCF. UCF gets their first Big 12 win in the conference. They get their first Big 12 win at home. They storm the court afterwards. Kansas tries to get back into it. They make a good run at it at the end. Dickerson makes a big run at it at the end, hits a big 3, but they're not enough. They can't get the shot. UCF hits some clutch free throws. They're able to win the game. But really, it's a defensive game, and this is what the Big 12 has really kind of solidified itself on in the last few years, and adding Houston to that as well. And Kansas has always been able to counteract it with really good offensive play. But this was their second lowest point total of the season. They lost to Marquette earlier in the season, scored 59. They scored 60 in this game. Then their lowest other than that was 69, was to UConn. So in the big games they have played, they have had lower point totals. That offense has not been electric enough to get going. They may have some issues as the season goes on with that offense, which, again, everyone is going to have, especially in the Big 12. You can't overreact too much when that offense is not performing at the highest level. We also saw number 9 Oklahoma, who was another one of those undefeated at home and playing really good teams, They lose to TCU 80-71. Oklahoma loses that game. Emmanuel Miller for TCU has 27 points in that game. Another big loss for the Big 12. We can also throw in number 5, Tennessee lost. Rick Barnes in Tennessee loses at Mississippi State, 77-72. Tolu Smith for Mississippi State puts up 23. And Tennessee they did not have enough help from the other guys on the roster. Necton Ziegler put up 54. Adu put up 9. And there was 9 from the rest of the team. So they tried to let their stars go. They weren't able to enough to stop the firepower of Mississippi State, who puts up 77 in the game. But we saw, again, so now in this week, 1, 2, 3, 5, and 9 have all lost in the first week of conference play for most of these teams. And for the Big 12, and for everybody who's been freaking out about Texas and losing to Texas Tech, and I get it's losing to Texas Tech at home. I get it. I get you didn't want to lose that game. It was not a good look. Texas didn't look good. It's not good they lost to UConn on the road. They didn't look great against Louisville. I get that. I get you didn't want to lose to Marquette on the road. And maybe there's some worries that this team's got a lot of growing up to do, which they do, and they got a lot of time to gel. They're not going to be the product. They don't have – I don't know if they have top 5 talent on that roster right now across the board. I think they've got some really good players, but across the board, I'm not sure they're there. I don't know if they're a top 5 team. I don't think they are. I think they could be a top 10 team by the end of the season if they gel correctly and the right guys are able to step up. Dylan Dessou's able to produce the way he is, but they're definitely a top 20 team that can be in there. And I know they're getting pushed more and more, but if they play the way they can play with the intensity they need to play with, then this can be a top 20 team easily. You can get into the tournament. I know it freaked everybody out that Lunardi put them on first 4 out in the tournament, in the bracketology. It's just too early. And for the Big 12, when people freaked out, with 2 games played in Big 12 season play, 2 games for every team, right? There's 3 teams that haven't lost yet. 3 teams out of the Big 12 have not lost a game yet, 2 games in. That is crazy to happen that fast, that there's not the separation, that there's not more bad teams that have dropped 2 already. This is a very good conference. Baylor, Texas Tech, and K-State are the 3 that have not lost a game yet. In the next week, Baylor plays K-State on Tuesday. Texas Tech plays K-State on Saturday. So K-State is playing Baylor and Tech in their next 2 games. If they win both of those, they're heading atop the Big 12. Remember, their Coach Tang from Baylor is there. That's going to be a really fun matchup on Tuesday to watch Tang versus Scott Drew. That'll be a fun matchup to watch. You also have Texas Tech versus Houston on Wednesday. So Texas Tech has got to play Kansas State, and then they got to play Houston, who's pissed off because they lost. There is a lot of big games coming up where you could see Texas be right back in the conversation atop them in just 2 weeks because everyone's losing. So as much as that Texas Tech loss was disappointing, it was a good wake-up call for Texas. Now, that's not saying beating Cincinnati is going to show that you're the best team, and you should have won by more, but it was on the road. I get there's problems. You still are a growing team. We don't know where this team will end up, but I think the immediate panic and the must-win, I think some of that is residual from football, and thinking that basketball is you must win every game sport, which is not. You need to win as much as you can. You can't lose at home. I get that. It was not a good win. Or a good loss. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it too much. But it definitely is not the end of the season for this Texas team. As I said, there's only 3 teams still that have not lost a game in the Big 12. Kansas got caught up in it against a UCF team that they didn't think was going to be that big. Oklahoma didn't trust that TCU could go into or could win. And these road games too. These road games. And that was what was big, that Texas could win a road game in a very hostile environment in Cincinnati, playing their first Big 12 game. These road games, teams don't schedule non-conference in basketball at real away games very often. You just don't see it very often. You see a lot of going to play tournaments where it's a road game for everybody and the intensity is kind of different. You're not necessarily playing in front of crowds that care either way. But to play true road games, they help build you. If you want to look at why UConn was able to win, which is UConn's the only team in the top 5 who didn't lose this week. UConn lost to Kansas earlier this season at Kansas. They've already been a bit more road tested. They've already had their wake-up call of, okay, this is what happens. Texas, they got the wake-up call at home. That's not a good look. It's not what you want to see. But they know, okay, now we have to be the aggressor. We have to go on the attack. And for when you watch basketball and you watch the college basketball last couple of days and this week and this weekend, you can see it is not a landscape with the transfer portal and NILs. It is now. And the G League taking a lot of guys where Ron Holland was going to be playing at Texas, but then the G League took Ron Holland away. Some of those top guys are not going to be going to college anymore. And it just takes away this part of the game where there is, Kentucky's or Duke's or whoever that are just head and shoulders above everybody else because they have that tradition. They have a really good coach. Plus they have, 4 returning guys and 2 studs that are coming in as freshmen. That doesn't exist as much anymore. You see a lot more stuff like Baylor where you have 2 studs coming in that are going to get a lot of playing time. But it's a question, can you get them ready by tournament time? Can the other guys step up? Can your transfers get in? For Texas, they were expecting this team this year to have Ron Holland and expected to get that stud freshman to go along with everything else. Plans change. You get Dylan Mitchell to come back. You get Dylan DeSue to come back. You get Tyrese Hunter to come back. So you're still a good team. You're still going to be able to compete all season long. And if we see Dylan DeSue, if he's able to transform into a player who does what he did against Cincinnati pretty regularly, and if we see Tyrese Hunter continue to play at a higher level than he's been playing at, and Max Abmas starts to find a little bit more comfort in playing with a team that is better and playing in a conference and playing against better opponents, if we start to see those things for this Texas basketball team, we'll see Texas grow and advance more. If we don't, it's going to be a long season. Are we going to see Caden Shedrick, who was dominant against some of the teams earlier in the season? Caden Shedrick, who looked like he could be a top guy. Could the rest of taking, having the back spasms, taking a day off, maybe taking another game off? We don't know what he'll be playing or not this weekend. Maybe, switching the roles. We know Dylan DeSue's on a minute restriction, but maybe pulling that back a little bit. We'll see if he goes back into the starting lineup and DeSue's on the bench come this weekend. We don't know what those are going to be yet. However, we do know that if Shedrick steps into a role where him and Dylan DeSue can exist at a high level, and I love Brock Cunningham, but, if you could have 2 guys that are just physically more talented than Brock and a little bit bigger than Brock play some big minutes for you, defensively and offensively, I think it makes them a better team going down the stretch. Again, I love Brock Cunningham. I want to see him succeed at a high level, and I think especially early in the season, Texas is a much worse team if you don't have Brock on the court being the field general. And, a position where you kind of expect a Tyrese Hunter to be more of that guy, Brock Cunningham has been that, especially defensively, getting guys and being the communicator and being the central point. He's been invaluable so far. He will continue to be extremely valuable, but you'd love to see the guys that can play just talent-wise, athletic-wise, at a little bit higher level than Brock to come in, and then have Brock come in for 20 minutes a game instead of 30 and have those 15 to 20 be electric minutes for Brock Cunningham where he's a real game changer. Come in when you need to change the pace and change the physicality in a game. I think that'll be a place where if Texas get there, they'll be looking a lot better. But you can see, after 1 week of play, the Big 12 is going to be a grind. We knew that going in, but knowing that only 3 teams won their first 2 games in Big 12 play. Only 3 out of the entire Big 12 won their first 2 games. It's going to be a grind. It's going to be a grind this year in the Big 12. Also of note, Texas does get another win. Texas women's team gets another win against TCU last night. Madison Booker, another big game. I believe she's the player of the week or the month or whatever. Madison Booker is just continuing to play really well after that Rory Harmon injury, kind of taking over as a team. She was playing well before, but, when you need someone to help take over, she's been playing really well. 21 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists for her. They play number 12 Kansas State on Saturday. It is of note that Sedona Prince was one of the top players for TCU. She was out with a broken finger against Texas. So it may have made it a little bit easier, but Texas continues to win. Texas women's team continuing to win after that horrible Rory Harmon injury, which you hate to see somebody that good get knocked out. But we did see that. She's coming back and going to play well as we keep going. Over in NBA talk, Draymond Green's suspension is over. The first game he sat out was a conditioning because part of what they talked about when he was out is that he did not play any basketball for 10 days, that he really stepped away from the game and tried to rethink some things. So he needed to get his conditioning back. It was back. He did not play in this game. He might have if it did not get so out of hand, where the Warriors have one of their worst losses in history, 141-105. It was on ABC, a brutal loss on national television. where you get a big game on ABC on a Wednesday night, and the NBA's hoping that it's going to be a showdown of Zion versus this Warriors team, and this young Pelicans team will be taking on the old guard, but the old guard didn't show up. Warriors shoot 30% from three. They can't do that, especially without Draymond. That defense isn't there. Clearly, they put up a 141. The Pelicans did. Pelicans shot 47.5% from three. It's just not doable. Klay Thompson is not the same guy that he was a few years ago. Not only is he not playing defense at the same level where he was one of the best perimeter defenders in the league, not only is he not getting open enough, so he's trying to create shots more than he is just getting those open shots where he was one of the purest shooters in the league. He's still a pure shooter. He's just not getting open as much. And then he's not creating contact and getting to the line, which you have to do when you're not getting anything else. You've got to be able to get to that free throw line. He hasn't been able to do any of those. And so we see guys like Moses Moody stepping up. We know Kuminga's upset. Podziemski is a guy who's starting now when Chris Paul's down. It's a long road for the Warriors, and I'm going to get into in a minute the NBA trade deadline buzz. We may wait and push that to the next segment, but we may hit it here. We'll figure it out. But the NBA trade deadline is coming February 8th, so we're less than a month away from it, and the Warriors are in a lot of talks there. But before we get to that, let's talk about the Spurs. They do win against the Pistons, a must-win game against the worst team in the league. You're the second worst record in the league. They win 130-108. Wemby gets his first triple-double in the game. Spurs basically are able to play. It's one of those things. The Spurs are not a terrible team. They just don't have the talent, and then they have a lot of young guys. And so when they go up, they're going up against all these other teams. They're just at a disadvantage, trying to figure out what they're doing. They're getting better every day. They're growing as a team. But then they played a Pistons team that does not have better talent than them. And so you see guys like Dominic Barlow is able to have a good game, and guys like that who just can't do that on a higher level against some of these better teams in the NBA. But it was good to see them get the win. They play Charlotte again, another one of those teams down near the bottom. I believe they play the Wizards coming up pretty soon. Could move themselves up from the basement to stare 4 or 5 in the basement. They're now one game in the loss column ahead of the Wizards. Now, this is sad to go through that, but they're at that point. But yeah, the Charlotte's right there as well. The Spurs can move up, and I get people say just tank it out if you're going to be bad. There's not another Wemby. There's not another top guy in this draft right now. So you just need to get somebody out of it who's going to be able to play well. You like to have a top pick, but this is not a year where you have to tank. You're not going to get super high anyway. You're not going to get super high up into the rankings. You're not going to make the play-in. You'll get a good enough draft pick from this. You're hoping that the Raptors stay above 6 so you get their pick as well, but we'll see what happens over there. The Rockets lose a game to the Bulls. Bulls look pretty good with Zach LaVine back in that lineup. Kobe White goes for 30 points. Zach LaVine puts up 25, 13 rebounds, and 7 assists. A real good game from Zach LaVine coming back from injury, feeling better. Alperen Sengun, though, for the Rockets. This is an issue with the Rockets that we have seen now. And I don't know, I want to say it's an issue. It's something that I don't think was expected from the Rockets, that, Jalen Green wasn't necessarily the most communicative, or, the guy who's going to demand the ball all the time. Now he wants to go play, and he's used to playing on teams where he's by far the best player. He's the stud. He's the guy. And so he went to the G League. He wasn't at that level anymore, and he didn't necessarily get the ball. He wasn't demanding the ball and demanding it be his team. Jabari Smith. We saw the problem with Jabari Smith is he doesn't demand the ball. So when a coach is saying, you run every play for this guy, he's the best guy on our team, which is how Jalen Green came up and is how Jabari Smith came up, those guys are able to shine because they're really good players. But on an NBA court, everyone's trying to get their own thing, and everybody's going to go out there and play, and they just haven't been assertive enough to get it. Alperen Sengun does not have that problem. He's going to get in the post. He's going to put his hand up. He's going to call for the ball. They're going to throw it inside, and he's going to beat on whoever he's got down in there. And he puts up another big game, 25, 9, and 5 for Sengun. Just a really good draft pick, and it'll be curious to see if they can continue to see him and fit him into a role where he's going to be able to be very productive, but play with other guys who maybe can speed the game up a little bit more and use it. Not necessarily completely rely on him just beating guys down the post, because today's game doesn't necessarily favor that as much. So you want to be able to do it, but you'd like to be able to get 20 out of him and get him a few more assists and get him to kick the ball back out, hit some big threes, get some big points. You'd also like to see them Jabari Smith and Jalen Green demand the ball a little bit more. Fred VanVleet also is a point guard, so he's going to distribute. But if they get the ball and they don't demand it, then they're going to start playing ISO, and it's just an issue right now. I think Dylan Brooks, another assertive person in there, does help this team out, especially on the defensive end, but another person to be assertive about what he wants to see. And for Mavs fans, tonight, Luka Doncic is out against the Knicks, but the Knicks will be coming to Dallas. We'll see Kyrie versus Brunson and see that matchup. Brunson coming back to Dallas. Knicks are 3.5-point favorites right now because Luka is out in this game, so it's going to be a difficult uphill battle. Lively and Grant Williams, both game-time decisions as well. You would figure Knicks have been really good since the trade for OG Anunoby, so we will see how that one ends up, but I would assume without Luka and everything, he may need to take a few days off. He looked really hurt in that last game, so we'll see what he's able to do. All right, let's go to Patrick's Big Fat Poll. Take a break. We'll come back. We'll hit the deadline and play some sound from Hook 'em Up with Ian Rob B. But let's hit that Big Fat Poll.
Patrick's Big Fat Poll of the day on the Horn.
Big Fat Poll of the day today. We're going to talk some NBA trade deadline. We're going to get to that when we come back from the break. So with the trade deadline coming, I want to ask you guys on the text line, 512-447-3776, 512-447-3776, what is your most hated trade? Not the worst trade, not necessarily the worst trade of all time. It may be the worst trade for your team, and that's why you hated it. It may be one because it traded away your favorite player. I can tell you I didn't like the Rodman-Sean Elliott trade. I still don't really like it, but I get it. Rodman was a better player than Sean Elliott was at the time. I'm not disputing that, but the culture of the team, Sean Elliott, one of the favorite guys for anybody who was a Spurs fan because he was always kind of out in the community. But that trade, I just hated that trade. Was not a fan. I liked Dennis Rodman when he got there, but if you look back on it and everything else, it ends up working out at the end of the day. But that trade. So something like that. What's your most hated trade where the trade happened and you just went, I hate this? Maybe you hated it and it worked out. Maybe you hated it and you were right. Text us in 512-447-3776. What's your most hated trade? We're going to come back. We'll talk a little bit about the trade deadline, some top targets on you, and then we will get into some sound from Hook 'em Up with Ian Robbie as well here on the Sports Complex in the Horn 1019, AM 1260, the Horn app, and hornfm.com. Back in the Sports Complex here on the Horn, playing Bowie for you all week since his birthday was on Monday. Who needs a good excuse? Who needs a good excuse to play Bowie all week long? We'll play some 512 Friday, though, for you tomorrow as well. Text lines open 512-447-3776. 512-447-3776 is the text line. Poll of the day: what's your most hated trade? Not worst. Not the worst trade. I can look those up. I can tell you about the worst trades of all time. There's lots in baseball, because baseball is always the one where you have the trade, and they trade off for prospects, and you end up getting a prospect that turns out to be an all-time great and a Hall of Famer, and the other guy plays, was a win now guy to get you, bump your ERA up by fractions of a run. Is that one? So the baseball has a ton. Basketball's got its fair share. NFL, they put some up there. I've seen somebody put one in. That's a solid NFL one. But yeah, if you have a hated trade, like someone where it felt like you felt it, your team maybe traded someone away you liked, or maybe you made a trade for someone that you don't like. That's always a disappointing one when you're like, I got to root for this guy now. Because the trade deadline's coming up for the NBA. And talk's coming up. Trade deadline is February 8th. So we are less than a month away from the trade deadline. And we're starting to find more of the winners and losers, or let's just say we're finding more and more of the teams that are starting to have to decide whether or not they should try and make the play-in, or do you want to move out, and how do your contracts work out, and do you want to keep this guy long-term? Are you trying to ditch a contract? Are you trying to move off salary? Or are you trying to move one of your expiring contracts and bring in some more talent? We're getting to that point of the season, and we're starting to see some big names pop up. We talked earlier about the Warriors. The Warriors are a big name in trade talks because they've kind of waited too long. And the Warriors are a team that I felt was going to be the Warriors were a team that I felt, really should have blown things up before they did. They're re-signing Draymond, and now they're in talks. They haven't re-signed Klay Thompson yet, but apparently he's not happy with the offer. I think they offered him 2 for $48, and he doesn't like that, whether it's a 48 and he wants more than 24 a year, or whether it's he wants more years. Because Draymond got 4, he may want 4 years. He may not want to, tap out in 2, and knows that if he signs for 2 more years, he's done after that. Or at least in Golden State. Somewhere else will go pick him up. But that team is looking, and they have an Andrew Wiggins who hasn't been same, and there was some off-the-court issues that happened last season, and he took some time away from the court to deal with those. And when he came back, he wasn't the same player, and he's not the same player this year. And you're seeing a lot of, with Andrew Wiggins, something that, maybe is more psychological, where his steal numbers are going down, his assist numbers are going down, and his shooting percentage is down too. But all of this kind of leads into someone who's not making those split-second decisions. That in basketball and all sports, really, you have to have the mind of, do I go now? And do I, you have to, when you make a decision, go. And in basketball, when you're cutting to the basket, whether you make the pass or you make the shot, or when you jump, and if you don't go to the basket at the right time, then there's no play. And now you have to dribble it out and pass the ball back out. It may be a turnover. Or, when you go for a steal, do you go for it or do you commit a foul? Do you find the right piece and you just know instinctually to go for it? And when you lose that confidence, it's real hard to get it back sometimes. And for Wiggins right now, he doesn't have it. And he has a lot of contract left. You have Chris Paul, who's on an expiring contract. Do you want to, and one of the reasons the Warriors wanted Chris Paul was that expiring contract, because there's a new CBA now. And the Warriors are in a place where they're going to have to decide whether or not they want to pay massive luxury taxes and take penalties and draft picks and other things, because the league is trying to even the bar a little bit more with some of the haves and the have-nots. And the Warriors have about a $400 million payroll. And if you go trade Chris Paul off for a contract that you're going to have to keep, well, now you're keeping a $400 million payroll instead of knocking it down and trying to get it near the $300 million pay range and getting out of a tier 2 or tier 3, whatever it is, for their CBA. What are they going to do in that situation? So they're in a big question. Are you able to trade Wiggins? Does he still have the value? Are you able to find a place that wants him? You have 2 young guys in Kuminga and Moody, and a lot of people want them, but are you willing to trade away your only young talent to be a really old team to try and get one more out of Steph Curry, and then the team all falls apart next year or the year after? You going to go all in for one even though you're not really in the hunt right now? Where are you at with Draymond Green? Is he coming back, or are you going to try to trade him off? You signed him to a new deal. Do you want to get rid of him? The Warriors have a lot of questions to answer, and that for a franchise and for a dynasty that has been going now, it is a big story in the NBA, if you're an NBA head, to see what is happening to Golden State. But for the other teams and teams that may want to be looking, there's some other teams. The Bulls are in a position. They have a really good aspiring contract with DeMar DeRozan. That's not too much money, but it's enough to get, you can get another guy. They may want an asset for DeMar DeRozan to not lose him in free agency or whatever, and for a contending team as the Warriors, as the Lakers, somebody like that, maybe the Miami Heat, somebody like that who needs another guard to go get a guy who probably has still a few more good years left in him. Not at the top level, but a guy that you could probably re-sign and bring back for, 2 more years, 3 more years, and see what DeMar DeRozan could do. The Bulls have Zach LaVine on a big contract that they may not want to keep. What do you do with Zach LaVine? Do you find space? All reports are there's no takers right now. The asking price is too high for him, and no one wants to put everything down and leverage their team into making him a superstar and him be your, at least number 2 guy on your chart. So that those trades haven't been flowing in for him, but they need to make a move on that because Lonzo Ball, they don't know what's happening with him. So a lot of stuff happened for the Bulls. The Grizzlies, John Morant's now out for the season. What are they going to do? Luke Kennard, Marcus Smart, guys they brought in to win now. Well, if you're not winning now, maybe this is a rebuild, and okay, let's keep Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant, get some young guys on this team and try and rebuild that way. And we'll see what they do. But they have some talent for win now guys. And some guys that may want to pick out there. And then 2 big names to look out for. Pascal Siakam from the Toronto Raptors. The Raptors, he is a free agent after this year. So if you make a trade for him, you want to make sure that you're going to be able to sign him. You want to make sure that you're going to be able to get him. But that's a team that another Warriors are into him. Pacers are looking at him a lot to see if you can add him there. The Dallas Mavericks would love to add a Pascal Siakam, to add another third option on that team, a real third option, someone else who can go in and get rebounds and play a little bit bigger, someone that you can put into that lineup where you're not necessarily playing Josh Hart or somebody like that where you like those guys, Josh Green, but you're playing those guys. You want to put those guys in the lineup. You want them to come off the bench, though. You don't necessarily want those to be your guys. In a lineup of Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic, Pascal Siakam, Grant Williams, and Derek Lively, looks like a team that could compete because now you've got multiple guys and you can keep 2 of them in at all times pretty much. And you have a pretty good lineup there. And then you've got some good guys on the bench, but I don't know how much you have to give up to go get a Pascal Siakam for the Mavs. But if they can find a way to get him with draft picks and capital and other stuff like that, you got to go get him because that gives you a real opportunity, especially if you can re-sign him and put that core together. Another name out there, DeJounte Murray. The Spurs trade him off to the Hawks. They want to pair him up with Trae Young. They feel that that's going to be the backcourt of the future. And Trae Young kind of fizzles down. The league focuses more on flopping and fouls where the player initiates contact, and he still gets those calls. But that was so much of his game. So much of his game was that old James Harden game of I'm just going to run into somebody, fall over, and get 2 free throws. And he's still a really good player, but he's undersized. So when you can't do that, the undersized factor comes back. He's not a big defensive player. DeJounte Murray and that backcourt's not happening. They're paying him a good amount of money. They may want to move on from that and try and figure out the future in Atlanta. And there's a number of teams that could use a point guard. And ironically enough, the Spurs are one of those people in those discussions apparently, that they still like DeJounte Murray. And now that they have Wemby, that he may want to play there more because now he's got a guy to go run up and down the court with that he didn't feel like he had before, that he felt he needed to get on. Maybe the grass wasn't greener on the other side. All of those are names to look out for. There's more names that will come up in the coming weeks, and we'll see teams that are the haves and have-nots and the teams that may want to make a run and the teams that are trying to get out from underneath some cap, and the new salary cap is adding in pieces. We know the Knicks still want to make a deal. We know the Heat still want to make a deal and get better. We know there's a lot of teams that want to make a deal and get better. We don't know. Houston's an interesting team to watch. They're a young team that's overachieving right now. Do they want to add another piece to that? To add another veteran to kind of help this younger team that's got Jabari Smith and Jalen Green and a Şengün who's playing really well. You added Fred VanVleet. You added Dylan Brooks. Is that all you want? Or do you want to add another piece into this? Maybe put a Jalen Green or Jabari Smith on your bench, or do you want to add somebody to put on your bench? Do you want to go after a Marcus Smart and go back to the Grizzlies and say, oh, no, we want Marcus Smart now. Here's one of those Brooklyn picks that they gave up, for James Harden. We want Marcus Smart, too, to add more intensity and more defense on that second end. And Ime has a relationship with him in Boston. Is that somebody they could be looking at? That's not necessarily doesn't have to be a star player, but could be a big difference as Rockets continue on. All right, those are some names for you. We're gonna take a break. We'll come back. We'll get to the text line 512-447-3776. If you guys want to talk about any of the NBA trade deadline, college basketball, send that stuff in as well. And what is your most hated trade? That's a poll today here on the Sports Complex in the Horn 1019, AM 1260, the Horn app, and hornfm.com. Back on the sports complex here on the Horn, playing Bowie all week for his birthday on Monday. Just talks about the NBA trade deadline, asking poll today, what is your most hated trade? Send that in on the text line, 512-447-3776. Anything else you want to talk about? 512-447-3776 is the text line number for the Horn and how we want to talk to you. Let's hit the text line up. Alabama should hire Tom Herman is the first thing I see. I don't think they're going to. I feel like he's pretty far down on their list. From what you hear reports, Sark was number one on their list, and he may have already turned it down. Dan Lanigan, we'll get into this in the 5. He's already turned it down too. But there may be some more. I'll get more into it in the next hour. But yes, there is. I don't think Tom Herman's high on their list. Something tells me that he's not high on their list. And I'm not hating on Tom Herman. I just feel like, his Texas tenure didn't end in a way that Alabama thought, let's have him replace the greatest coach of all time. Sergeant Cake says Brock Cunningham is trash. Are you not a Texas fan? I don't know. I don't know any Texas fan that has that take. Brock Cunningham is not trash. He is far from it. I know there's points where people get upset because the offense isn't as great as it needs to be, but as a floor general, if you watch how the team plays with him on the court versus without him for a lot, especially early in the season, it was a noticeable difference of people not knowing where to go and where to be. And Brock being able to help be the coach on the court. But you'd like to see him on the court less. That was my point earlier. I'd like to see him on the court a little less because you want to see the guys who have higher ceilings on the court more. And Brock to really be able to, when he comes in, do his job, not necessarily be as beat up as you get later in the season, have him come in, change the attitude. Something that Zarek Onyema is doing pretty well right now. But have Brock doing that as well and be the guy who can come in and lead a second unit maybe a little bit more as well. Texas says, so you're saying Texas Tech is not as good as a team as Texas, even though our only 2 losses are on the road to Villanova and on the road to Butler by less than 5 points? Sure, man, sure. I'm not saying that. I do think we're a better team than you, so I am saying it now. I didn't say it then. I do think we're a better team. I think we have more experience and we can go in, but I think Texas Tech is a good team. My point was I think Texas Tech is a good team, and I think there's a lot of teams in the Big 12 that on any given day of the week can beat any other team. I don't think a loss to Texas Tech is necessarily the fire the coach, trade all the players. I don't know if it was the burn down the building problem that it seemed to be, that the season was over because they lost a home game to Texas Tech. And if they lose a road game to Cincinnati, we might as well stop playing basketball at the University of Texas. It felt like that was the attitude at Texas at a point, and I was saying that's not the point. I think Texas Tech is a good team. I think Texas Tech is a good basketball team. I think they always put together a good effort and a good team. It's a question of, do they necessarily have all the talent that's there, and are they able to excel at a high level later in the season? That's where they've been missing the last few years. As the season gets a little bit further down, the shortcomings of talent rear their heads as some of the other teams get better and better. But and I haven't watched. I can tell you, I've watched probably a half of Texas Tech basketball this season, so I can't tell you I've watched enough of it to really give you a full analysis. I can tell you that as well. Locksmith Ryan says, I hated the Amari Cooper trade to the Browns. Hats off to that one, Locksmith Ryan. That is a solid call. That was a crazy bad trade. Crazy bad trade. And I like Brandon Cooks, fine, but you shouldn't have had to go through all that work and give up everything you had to give up to get Brandon Cooks when you could have just kept Amari Cooper, how good he is, but you decided that you had to move on from him. Yeah, that's solid one, Locksmith Ryan. That is a solid pickup on that one. And again, I'm not saying the worst trades, but a hated trade, if you're a Cowboys fan, to see that trade, and I'm not even a Cowboys fan, but I root for them. I won't give myself fan. I'll let you guys celebrate that one. But yeah, that's one that just watching, you go, why would you do that? And as a Texans fan, now we got to play against him this week. He's apparently coming back. I hate it double now, Locksmith Ryan. I'm with you. Right Guy from New Mexico says, my least favorite trade of all time would have to be the DJ Moore trade to Chicago. I'm not even a Bears or Panthers fan, but I still see how dumb that trade was. Yeah, that was a bad one. And then I think Alex Caruso traded the Bulls was a bad move in the Lakers. They did not trade him. Alex Caruso fell into the role that they were trying to not mess up with Austin Reeves, whereas they signed him to a 2-year deal instead of a 3-year deal, which meant that they didn't have his bird rights. So it meant they couldn't offer him a big enough contract. And so he was able to go somewhere else, and he ends up going to Chicago, I believe is what happened. I have to go back and look, but I know that it was a deal where they didn't have his bird rights, so they could not get him. They would have loved to keep him. They want to trade him back now. But yeah, that is the dumb trade that the fact the Lakers don't have him, that they found a real gem, like they scouted a guy, got a good player, and then didn't keep him. Yeah, and the DJ Moore trade, the trading away your pick this year, trading away another first. It's what's crazy is they did not get as much grief as the Texans did for theirs. That everybody said the Texans were giving away a number one pick, that the Texans were going to be awful, but somehow the Panthers were going to be good with no one on their roster either. I don't know why there was not more grief about that trade, but everybody was on the Texans. And the Texans are in the playoffs now, and that pick is now turned out to be a high teens pick, so it's not quite as bad. Nate, I appreciate this. I appreciate all your text, but I'm not trying to get fired today. So I'm not going to read those texts, but I appreciate them, Nate. I appreciate them, and I appreciate the humor in them and the sadness in them, but I'm not trying to get fired today, Nate. But I appreciate the loyalty. I'll say that. I appreciate the loyalty. Texter says, Mavs are begging anybody to take Grant Williams off their hands. Really bad fit for them. I don't think he's going to be a bad fit for them. I think, it's going to take time for him to merge, but if he's hitting threes, he's playing well. I think the problem is when you don't have Lively and when you put anybody with Dwight Powell and they're expecting him to do some other things. But I think if you add another player in there that can play at a high level, I think he could fall into that spot. I don't necessarily think Grant Williams is necessarily the problem. And he's had, at the beginning of the season, he was playing great. Dallas is one of those teams. It always seems to be in this flux of everyone on the team wants to run and play offense. No one wants to play defense. And Jason Kidd does not care about offense. All he wants to do is have his team play defense. And I don't know why they're still together. It doesn't make sense. It does not feel like that team, what they do well and what Jason Kidd wants it to happen are ever on the same page. And so it just ends up with certain guys getting pushed away. All right, well, let's take a break. We're going to come back, get on to more of the text line, talk some more NCAA football. We'll recap the news, the big news from the 40 acres today. We'll recap the news from Tuscaloosa as well and get a little NFL talk as well as the playoffs are coming up real soon. All that coming up and more right here on the Sports Complex in the Horn 1019, AM 1260, the Horn app, and hornfm.com. Hour 2 on the Sports Complex. Got more of your texts coming, 512-447-3776. We'll reset some news about the good news. Who's coming back to Texas? I've not seen the last one. We'll tell you the other person who's there. Some news from Tuscaloosa, or no news, or whatever we've got from Tuscaloosa. We'll tell you that. Some NFL talk as well. We'll get to all of that here in hour 2. We'll continue our discussions on the text line, 512-447-3776, about basketball, talking some NBA, talking some college basketball, anything you want to throw in there. Send those texts in as well. And a trade deadline coming up less than a month away now, so we can get into all of that talk and the poll of the day because of the trade deadline. What is your most hated trade of all time? I'm not saying the worst. What's your most hated? What was the one that you as a fan said, I hate this. I still hate this. I'm never going to like it. Maybe you said I hated it, and then now you like it. Maybe it's just one of those, I hate this trade. I don't like the player I got. I don't like the way I don't like the guy we're sending out, maybe. Maybe it's one of your favorites they sent away. Maybe it's one of your least favorites they got. You know, sometimes those work out. I mean, it wasn't a trade, but when the Spurs signed Robert Horry, man, I was not feeling that one. Beat us at the Lakers, beat us with the Rockets. But when he played for Spurs, I was having fun watching him play in my team's uniform. I enjoyed that for sure. Starting the news, and we'll get to the text line in just 1 second, 512-447-3776. I do want to hit a little bit of the recap of the news for college football before we get some NFL talk. The big news is Quinn Ewers has made his decision on where he will end up playing football next season, and let's let him tell you.
Longhorn Nation. Ever since I was a kid, I've dreamed of playing quarterback at the University of Texas. I couldn't be more thankful to all my teammates and coaches, and I'm beyond grateful to be in the position that I'm in. God has shown me who I truly am these past 2 years that I've been here. And through the ups and downs, these fans and this university has always had my back. And with that being said, I'm coming back. Hook 'em.
That is what Quinn posted today on all his social media to let the world know that he is coming back to Texas for another season of football. It does mean that Texas now has a lot more experience in that quarterback room, a lot more experience in the quarterback position. That offense that is losing so many key pieces from Jay Witt to Xavier Worthy, to Adonai Mitchell, to JT Sanders, and 75-80% of your targets this season are all leaving, going to the NFL, and best of luck to all of those guys. But to add a little bit more consistency, to add into the fact that you're now going into the transfer portal, saying that you're going to be able to play, and if you stay for 2 years, you're playing with Quinn and then Arch, but to say you're coming in this season, we know what's happening. Quinn Ewers, who is the current front runner with Jalen Milroe for the Heisman Trophy next season, the early voting. And I know that's a lot of it is because they know Texas fans have money and will spend it. But to have all of that, to have Quinn Ewers coming back is a big, big plus for Texas. It's a big plus for Sark. It also means, in all the talk about Tuscaloosa and Saban, that, Quinn Ewers probably talked to Saban and got his assurance he would be back. But it is a big news. And for someone to know the system as well as he does, for someone that we saw his progress from year 1 to year 2. And in season, there's improvement, but that offseason and how much better he looked, how much better more comfortable he is in that offense. When you see guys like Michael Penix and Jalen Daniels and Jordan Travis and just all those guys that have been playing at multiple places, and not even playing multiple places, but multiple years, and had more and more experience on them, how well those guys play with more experience, that you may be getting something special from Quinn Ewers is staying another year. He said that it felt right for him to get another year of experience, another year of mentorship and coaching from Sark. All of that is going to help him get to where he wants to be. And it makes sense in an NFL draft with a lot of quarterbacks in it and a lot of good quarterbacks. So let those guys go and, give yourself a better chance to be a top 10 or a first round quarterback in next year's draft. Get yourself better prepared for when you get to the NFL to be able to succeed instead of being, a third or fourth round pick that's a not guaranteed contract, and maybe they don't necessarily give you the attention they need to, or you're thrown in way too soon and you're not ready to go yet. Both those happen to a lot of guys in the NFL. So I'm happy for the decision from Quinn. I know we're going to see a ton of clickbait articles, and we've already seen people and every analyst with nothing else to talk about. Which, why do you have nothing else to talk about right now in sports? But they're all saying Arch is gone. There's still no belief. I'm sure that Arch and Quinn have talked. I'm sure that none of this was surprising. The reports were that Quinn was coming back midway through the season after he suffered the injury. That the reports were that Quinn was coming back, that Quinn was coming back. So we figured Arch was coming back. He didn't transfer. Plus, we know that most quarterbacks don't play an entire season. Most quarterbacks have at some point miss a game or miss time, and Arch will be the guy there. He's going to help his development to move up that 2 role and kind of take the steps forward, get into a place where he's going to be able to play better and better. I think it's just a great thing all across the board for Texas for Quinn Ewers to be coming back. The last person that we have not heard from is Jahdae Barron. That is the last name that, some people hate the secondary and want everybody gone. I personally prefer to see him come back. But if he decides to move on, then best of luck to him as well. But he's the last person that is contemplating, I'm sure, waiting to see, what Texas does in the secondary, what Texas ends up, if they are keeping their coaches, if they're bringing in a Dwayne Aquina, or if they're bringing in some other help, seeing what that'll be. I'm sure he's waiting to hear more from NFL scouts that maybe he move up a little bit more or move down, and all of those come into it. Maybe talking to his family, maybe talking, spending some time alone to figure that out. But I'm sure we'll hear about that. But that's the last one to hear there. Also over in college football, Dan Lanning was reported to be in Tuscaloosa last night. Whether that was true or not, or whether that was just a great job from Dan Lanning to put out a hype film for Oregon and for himself going into the Big Ten and a recruiting film, it seems like maybe it was more of a ply that he got a phone call that people were looking at him, but he has a $5 million buyout at Oregon, so it was never probably – and they have the pockets at Alabama. They could do it if they wanted to. It's not like a $40 million or something like that. It's $5 million. It's a lot, but they could have done it. They didn't have to buy out Saban, so, you're not hurting there. But he is apparently moved on. Or he's staying at Oregon, sorry. He's going to be staying at Oregon. And he put out a big video that was basically saying there's nothing that you couldn't do here in Oregon that anywhere else, and this is the best place to be, and this is the best job in the country and everything to get more recruits. So I think that he may have used this all as a ploy to, hey, let me get some more money from Oregon and let me get more recruits and go try and pilfer, Alabama. The 30-day portal is open when your coach leaves or a coaching change happens. So that is open for Alabama. If any of those players want to walk away, we still don't know about Jim Harbaugh. If that portal opens at Michigan, you could have 2 teams in the college ball playoff changing coaches, 2 teams with 30-day transfer portal opens, and people going to look, and now Texas has an experienced quarterback. Could those guys want to go? Could you get a wide receiver? Could you get somebody else from one of those teams that may want to come and play 1 more year of football or 2 more years? Maybe someone that went over to play for the greatest of all time, the guy who has more first-round draft picks than losses at his time as Alabama, and they may not like the next guy. By the way, what you're hearing now is one of the ones they're talking to is Kalen DeBoer. Is that Kalen DeBoer from Washington, which makes sense in a lot of ways, that the AD that hired Kalen DeBoer isn't there anymore, that he's losing Penix and Adunze and a lot of players on that Washington team. He's going to have to rebuild. He doesn't have the recruiting class necessarily. I don't know if he has the recruiting chops to be the coach at Alabama, but I know he's a hell of a coach. And they could get some other recruiters in there and try and help him out with that. So we'll see what he ends up doing. But Kalen DeBoer right now is probably the top of the list of names that you may see at Alabama. Dabo Swinney, Mike Norvell, both are going to be looked after too. But every report is basically saying they're asking for 3 days from their players. 3 days to not jump into the portal, not jump out of it, to the recruits, to the players. 3 days to say, let us go hire your next guy. Let us show you what we're going to do here at Alabama. We're still going to be great. So you expect that decision sooner rather than later, and Kalen DeBoer makes the most sense for it to be sooner rather than later if they make that move. So that is the news in college football. Let's get back to the text line before we talk some NFL. 512-447-3776. Talking, college football. The news with yours today. The news with Nick Saban and what's going to be happening in coaching. We're talking about NBA, the trade deadline coming up. Spurs get a win. They're not the worst team in the league or the worst record. They're now third. They're third now, man. They're moving up them charts. Talk some NCAA basketball as well with all the madness that is happening in NCAA basketball. It's only January. Texter says, as a Tech fan, I don't like seeing Brock Cunningham on the court. He's got that dog. Yeah, he does got that dog in him. As a matter of fact, Patrick, I believe the entire world should stop playing basketball, period. Jordan from Round Rock. I apologize, Jordan from Round Rock. I love basketball. I played it every single day growing up. It's my favorite sport. I love football. I watch a lot of baseball. I like baseball a lot too. But I am a basketball junkie. That's what I love doing. So you're going to hear basketball talk all season. And plus, it's the off season. I mean, I don't know how much I can talk about things that aren't happening. But we'll talk NFL too, because there is the playoffs coming up on Saturday. So there is a lot coming up. And tomorrow's show is going to have a ton of NFL getting us ready for the playoffs in the first round. And both Texas teams are in, which is always great to see. Going to be a lot of losses at the top of college basketball. It's already started. Yes. Teams 1, 2, 3, and 5 all lost. Number 9, Oklahoma lost as well within the past 2 days. That's a lot. We get the McCaffrey trade, being a Cowboys fan. Yeah, that is, if you're a Cowboys fan, I would hate that trade too. That did not work well. I like the trade because it ended up working out really well. I think it kind of worked out for both teams. They need to get McCaffrey off the Panthers, and the 49ers. It has been – I'm a big Shanahan fan, Kyle Shanahan fan, and, man, giving him that toy feels unfair. It does feel unfair. Text says, I don't think Brock is trash. He's a big asset, but maybe he doesn't need to start. That's what I was saying earlier. Is I think where you'd like to end up is with Shedrick and Dessou as the two bigs in that lineup, Dylan Mitchell as your third, and then Tyrese Hunter and Max Abmas. That's your starting lineup. I think that's where you need to be headed by March. Headed in that direction. I know that they're trying to play around with it with the minutes restriction on Dessou, and Shedrick kind of has the minute restrictions too with that surgically repaired shoulder. So I think that they're kind of trying to figure that out. But I think in reality, you'd like to come out and your closing lineup. Also, your closing lineup is kind of more in today's basketball the be-all, end-all. Who's out there at the end of the game? And see it. That's your beginning and end lineup is Shedrick and Dessou with Dylan Mitchell, Max Abmas, and Tyrese Hunter. I think that's where you want to head up if you're Texas. Chan says, why has Sark been offered why hasn't, I'm guessing, saying Sark a contract to date? Because, well, also to throw in, I believe the agent for Sark is the agent for Dan Lanning, is the agent for Kalen DeBoer, is the agent for Mike Norvell, is the agent for Dabo Sweet. Like, the agent for Sark is the agent for. He's really the one guy is controlling. All Alabama has to do is call one guy. They just got to call this one agent. He goes, I'll talk to my guys. So there's one like mega agent that does a lot of coaches and a lot of top coaches. So I think they're probably busy on some other things, but Texas is working on it behind the scenes. You got to, there's a lot of contract talk in that. And then you also throw in an extension. You want to expand the buyout, but he wants to extend his buyout. So it's not necessarily the money, the numbers of how much a year it is, but all right, well, we want to make it if someone else wants to hire you and you go away, that they got to pay us $20 million. And Sark says, cool, but I want $50 million if you fire me. And then they go, well, we don't want to do. So those numbers are a lot where you have to negotiate and kind of find that middle ground in there. Text says, favorite trade, Yordan Alvarez to the Astros for Josh Field from the Dodgers. I appreciate it. It's not the question, but I appreciate it. I appreciate the solid guess on, or solid correct assessment that trade from Yordan was a great trade. Also, by the way, if you're an Astros fan, I'll tell you this for this. Chas McCormick and Kyle Tucker both reached deals with the Astros to avoid arbitration today. So two outfielders for the Astros both reached deals to avoid arbitration today. So good news there from the Astros. Now, there's still other issues, but put that in there. Dexter says, if we're talking NBA today, can we reminisce about how Akeem worked Robinson like a I will not say this. Come on. Stroh's losing Nolan Ryan sucked. Yes, it did. I remember the greatest story about that is that the Dallas media had to go find out how old he was because they were all excited that they got him. The Rangers like, we got a guy, we got Nolan. And then they were like trying to go find an almanac or something, like a baseball almanac to say how old Nolan Ryan actually was. And they realized he was like 40 and they're like, oh, okay. Still good though. Still good. It's always a great story. Dexter says, let's see. I'm a Vikings fan. The worst may have been what Dallas got for Herschel Walker back in the day. I love that ESPN 30 for 30 short, the great trade robbery. Great stuff about how they put it together and Minnesota thought they were fleecing the Cowboys. They're like, dude, we're giving up all these garbage guys for Herschel Walker. He's the best player in football. We're going to dominate him. And basically, Jimmy Johnson had put in trade equivalents. So if they cut the guy, they got a draft pick instead. And the Vikings didn't even think that the Cowboys would be crazy enough to cut like 7 guys to get the draft picks. But that's what ended up happening. The Cowboys cut all the guys. They didn't want any of them. They just wanted the draft picks. But they knew they couldn't negotiate the draft picks out of it. And that makes it a great Jimmy Johnson trade. One of the reasons that team got built was that trade. Worst trade ever had to be Ditka trading all their picks for Ricky Williams. Nobody's worth that. Yeah, they gave up a ton for Ricky. And Dick could, like those personalities they just could not match either. Like if I think of guys that would not be the best coach for Ricky Williams, Ditka's got to be at the top of that list. But, I'm happy that people thought Ricky was that good out of Texas. But yeah, that was not the trade. Nate says, I hated trading Herschel Walker. That's another one. Yeah, the Herschel Walker. Agree with that totally. And Freak Nasty says, just turned in. Love the show, Patrick. What if USC fires Lincoln Riley to hire Pete back? I don't think that's happening. Pete Carroll, again, he's 72 years old. And to come back to college at this point with, the same reason why Saban left. You're saying, man, the amount of hours I have to work because I'm not just recruiting. I have to then keep recruiting my own players. And I have to keep them. I have to now boost to get NIL money that I didn't have to boost before and go through all this legal mumbo jumbo with that of making sure that I'm, getting the right things in there, but talking to one guy to make sure and trying to get word of this is the guy we want to pay and not this guy. We need to make sure the money's right over here and all of that kind of stuff. Making sure you're having to hire coaches because you have attrition at the coaching position because they keep taking away your coaches and they keep hiring your coaches away. And everyone's coming after you because you're the GOAT, and they know, well, if Saban likes him, then he's got to be great. That amount of stress, and that's what Pete Carroll kind of went through. The NFL is less than that. You get some more time off. But with the NFL, the problem is it gets harder and harder to change it up the older you get, and sometimes you just need to change up, and I think that's what Seattle needed. But I do not see him going back to USC. Now, he may end up back at USC in a few years in that advisor role, in a role kind of like what Bob Stoops does at Oklahoma or what Nick Saban's going to end up doing at Alabama. I know Darrell Royal at Texas was able to keep, he was on the payroll for a long time afterwards because it meant something to coach to parents and to high school coaches. And he would go and talk to recruits. And that was something that he was still around. And, and I think that there was points where they probably could have talked to him more about football, but he was still on the payroll and still doing things with the team for years because the legendary coach. And once you win those national championships, they like to keep you around as long as they can. Those are all interesting points of where these guys, it's still the craziest to have all those great coaches all not be at their jobs in such a succession is just nuts. To have Bill Belichick, Nick Saban, and Pete Carroll, 3 of the greatest to ever do it, all not coaching their teams within a couple days, within hours of each other at some point, for some of those guys, it's just crazy. It's just crazy. Which we did. We haven't talked as much about Bill Belichick, which I haven't even really mentioned as much today. The Bill Belichick, we didn't even get that story. We're supposed to get into it in this hour. That Bill Belichick is out at the Patriots. He started in 2000, 6-time champion. He's got 302 wins. This is the number, and this is the reason why there's a mutual parting of ways. This is where everything else, where the Kraft wants to move on. He goes, last 3 years have been tough. All of that goes around to, I think, at the end of the day, Bill Belichick, he's 71, I believe, but he knows he is really close to being the all-time winningest coach, and something that is probably never going to get passed by anybody else. So if he can get that, then he puts his name on all these other records that maybe get broken or maybe something else happens. That one feels like it's kind of out of reach in today's NFL where people don't keep you around. Where a Mike Vrabel, who, was a coach of a year a couple years ago and doing really well, has 2 bad seasons and he's out. I think that it's going to be harder for anybody to get there. He has 302 wins. George Halas has 318. Don Shula has 328. So he can get there in 2 if he has a really good team. But in 3 years, pretty easily, three 10-win seasons, and he's there. He's got the record. 3 9-win seasons. He's got the record. So you just have to get to a good enough team. I still think the Chargers are the best place for Bill Belichick to land. I still think that the Chargers make the most sense of the biggest problem that he's had is not having a quarterback. And if you look at the positions that are currently open, if we're going to say someone is not going to bring him in to replace somebody else because he's available, that you have the Panthers, he's not going to the Panthers. Like that's too much of a rebuild, too much time. It's got a crazy owner. He's not going there. The Titans, he's not going to go there. They just fired his buddy and Mike Vrabel, and that's a rebuild as well. I don't think he's going to the Titans. They'll talk to him, but I don't see him going there either. The Raiders, I don't think he's dealing with Mark Davis, so I think we can cross that one off. The Seahawks, I think right now we're all saying that the front runner for the Seahawks gig is Dan Quinn. So if we say he's not going to be the guy, Dan Quinn is going to be the guy, then the Seahawks are probably out. Plus, they just got rid of Bill. Like, it's a weird move to go Pete Carroll to Bill Belichick. Just seems like a kind of a, not a lateral move, but somewhat lateral move. The Commanders are an interesting one. But it basically leaves the Commanders, the Chargers, and the Falcons as your 3 teams that I think have a real shot to get Bill Belichick to go after him. The Falcons are said to be really going after him. I think Arthur Blank wants to get a guy who wants to win now, who wants to use their players. For Bill Belichick, there is some good defense there. He can kind of build the team defensively how he wants to build it. He's got some good young talent on offense to get an offensive coordinator in, whether he brings Bill O'Brien with him, whether he goes and gets Josh McDaniels again, which I'd hate to see to Bijan for that to happen. But he can go get an offensive mind to put on that end, not Matt Patricia, put an offensive mind on the Falcons on the offensive end, coach that defense up, and kind of bring some more structure. And in a division where you feel 9 or 10 wins is very doable. That the Saints are not necessarily going to all of a sudden blow up. The Tampa Bay is not necessarily all of a sudden. None of those teams really seem to be on the rise as much as the Falcons in that division. That the Falcons have Kyle Pitts, they have Drake London, they have Bijan Robinson, they have some pieces. So it does make sense there, but they don't have a quarterback. And if I'm Bill Belichick and I know today's game and I don't have a quarterback, that worries me a bit. And I have to go find a rookie and hope it works out. It didn't work out with Mac Blake. Did the first season, did his rookie season, but I have to find him there. If I go to the Commanders, same problem. Tons of cap room. Maybe I can go get a veteran, but they just trade away their whole D-line. I got to rebuild that defense now. And they got money, but can I get guys? And do guys really want to come play for Bill Belichick? I think some do, and I think a lot don't. Because they know what it is. They know the work that goes into it. So you're going to get some guys, but you're not going to be able to just go out and spend the money and get everybody. But the Chargers, with Khalil Mack, with Joey Bosa, with some really good players on that defense, with some real defensive talent, with Justin Herbert, a real player, with the offense that has, with all the pieces there, that you could probably win 2 games. You could go for a Super Bowl next year if you're on the Chargers. If you get the right guys in there, the Chargers could go for a Super Bowl next year with Bill Belichick. I think that makes the most sense for a guy who probably has less than 4 years left in his career. And maybe he's going to coach for more, but I think 4 years is really the max you're going to see left of Bill Belichick. And it's all assuming he doesn't walk away, which I don't think any of us think he is. That, to me, makes the most sense. But if the ownership, that's the problem. Maybe he doesn't trust the Spanos. Maybe he doesn't trust that they really are going to be able to spend. Maybe he sees the writing on the wall that they've spent too much money already, and it could blow up in a year. And he could get one good year, and if he doesn't win and just trying to install things, and it doesn't work in 1 year, they got to start trading players off, and he's downhill there. So the Falcons may be the place. I think the Chargers make the most sense. If you can make it work and Bill Belichick can work his magic, that makes the most sense for me. But I think the Falcons are second. The Commanders are a third because you have to build too much on that defense for Bill Belichick. That's just my opinion. And we'll see what happens in the coming days, where he ends up, where everybody ends up. I was kind of surprised they didn't try and trade him, but I think the same issue that the Titans talked about which is the amount of time you have to wait while they conduct all of their interviews before they make that trade, just kind of puts you so behind the eight ball. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll hit some more text, some sound from me. Hook them up with Dean and Robbie. When we come back here on the Sports Complex on the Horn 1019, AM 1260, the Horn app, and hornfm.com. Back on the Sports Complex here on a Thursday afternoon. Just finishing up some Bowie for you here. Getting to a 512 Friday tomorrow, but it was Bowie's birthday on Monday, so we've been playing some David Bowie all week long. No bad reason to play David Bowie all week long. Always one of my favorites. Rebel there. From David Bowie. Text line is rolling. 512-447-3776. Bevo Angel says worst trade was giving up all of those picks and all that money for Russell Wilson to Denver. My Broncos are in full rebuild mode. I think this fits in. The actual question is the trade you hated the most hated trade, but I think this fits for you if you say your Broncos are in full rebuild mode. I think that we can agree that you maybe hate that trade the most too. Nate says Ty trading gummies for pants was not a fair trade. Look, Ty, I think, just out there enjoying life. I like Ty. He's a good guy. I always enjoy it. We used to do Instant Series together. Used to back several years ago. We were doing when I was doing the Monday night show, and he would be producing it when he first started up here. It was always fun to talk with Ty some sports. Maybe he'll come on the Sports Complex one day. Maybe we'll get him on here. Who knows? But yeah, sometimes you gotta feel yourself, and you need to move around unencumbered. I don't know how you walk out into 40-degree temperature and don't know you don't have pants on, but teach their own. No, I'm not judging Ty. I'm not going to judge him. Texture says, you knew Saban's time was ending when he screamed and cried about NIL and no one jumped. I don't think he was that bad. I think he wanted more money. I think he more or less was always trying to go to the donors and get more money. And all those coaches don't want to pay NIL. And I think it's that thing where you hear the phrase and they know that someone comes up to them and goes, well, I could get $2 million here. And they go, no, you can't. And I can't yell at you. Or else you're not going to come here because be like, he was rude. He kept telling me I couldn't make $2 million. Like, you're not making $2 million anywhere. That's why guys keep going to places like Ohio State and then transfer out because they're promised one thing and told another. And go, well, if you win us a national championship, we'll pay you. Like, no, once I've done it, you're not going to pay me because I'm gone. It's, it's unregulated. It needs to be regulated, and it'll be much better. But I don't know. I think it's more, he's a 72-year-old man who's been working like 16-hour days for the past 25, 30 years. I think that may be more of it than anything else. And he just can't do it anymore. Where, when you wake up and you're like, and you get up and you go, and then you're like, I don't remember what I'm doing as you get older. I think it's live. And look, NIL, yes, transfer portal, of course, it's part of the decision. I don't think that's what made him do it this week, though. Texture says, I think Belichick is going to the NFC just so he doesn't have to play New England as much. I could believe that as well. And that also falls into the Falcons position where he doesn't have to play them as much. I'm just saying, man, in the NFL where you need to have a quarterback, I don't know how you can get away from not having it would scare me too much to go, well, I'll just go to the Falcons and then I'll hope that I get a Michael Penix or I hope I get that. And I mean, maybe he'll say trade away whatever future draft pick because I'm not going to be here and I don't care, and go get me the top, a top 3 pick. And I'll get Jaden Daniels, Drake May, or Caleb Williams, and I'll be fine with any of those guys. We can make them work. I mean, he's still got to figure out who would be an offensive coordinator for him. Does he bring in Josh McDaniels, who's as toxic as can be at this point? And Josh McDaniels apparently had his guys that he really wanted. And, I mean, he did apparently scout C.J. Stroud, right? Maybe that's revisionist history, but he said he wanted to give up the entire basically franchise to go get C.J. Stroud in a deal and trade up to number 1 to get it. And they weren't able to get that deal, and the Panthers do. But I don't know. I couldn't tell you if he really cares that much or if it's going to be about money, ownership, and who gives him the best chance to win 27 more games? 27 more games? That's really what it is. Who gives him the best chance to win 27 more games before he retires and not fire him and not do anything else? That to me is the biggest question. Is who gives him the best chance to win 27 more games. Texter says Dan Quinn to Seattle. That seems to be the one. Everyone is saying that Dan Quinn had always kind of made it known that was his dream job, was that Seattle job after coaching there, that's where he wanted to go back to eventually. Pete Carroll ever left. It is now open. He is not a head coach anywhere else. The Cowboys are in a really tough spot that unless they get blown out this week by the Packers, which should not happen, that Mike McCarthy's probably going to stay as coach. And it's hard to get rid of him with how well the offense is played with him as a play caller. I'm not a big Mike McCarthy guy. but I also know that it's hard to get rid of a coach with that level of success unless it's a catastrophic failure in the playoffs, and then he has shown that he cannot coach in the playoffs, and that's what matters. Then you may have to make that move, and then you can offer Dan Quinn, but then you're offering Dan Quinn to stay, and you have to match and make it more, a better deal for him to stay than go to Seattle where he really has full control, and he'll have more control hiring his staff. He gets to still work with a Pete Carroll, who he likes a lot, and he'll be an advisor there, and they can work together, which is maybe is better than Jerry, but who knows? I would say that Dan Quinn is probably on his way to Seattle. And maybe Seattle wants a complete different change. We're not judging in that Seattle may say, well, we don't want to stick with Dan Quinn either. We need a complete rebuild and a complete reshake. That's why we got rid of Pete Carroll. If we wanted Dan Quinn, we kept Pete Carroll. Seattle could just say, we don't want that. We're moving on from that part of our history. They could, but I don't know. I just don't know how you say no to Dan Quinn if you're Seattle, and I don't know how you say how Dan Quinn says no to Seattle unless Dallas just comes with everything. And I don't know if that's the right hire for them either. Just to try and keep the guys you got, and it's a tough place. I'm sure it's not what Jerry Jones wanted to see. Not what Jerry wanted to see at all. Texter says, would Bill O'Brien be considered for the Alabama job? No. I can pretty much give you a resounding no, that Bill O'Brien was so bad as an offensive coordinator. He broke the coaching car wash. That Bill O'Brien was, how Sark went through it and a bunch of other coaches went through Saban, where it kind of reformed their image and made them very hireable. Sark went through where he couldn't get a job and ends up as a head coach at Texas through Alabama. He gets like an advisor role, then ends up going to Atlanta as offensive coordinator, then comes back to Alabama and gets a head coaching job at Texas through that. Bill O'Brien went through, and all reports were that he was not very well liked and that the offense didn't work, and he's not a college guy anymore, and he was not necessarily a college guy before at Penn State when he got hired, and he needed to go back to the NFL and recruiting-wise and everything else. I don't think Alabama was a fan of him. Now, that's not saying that he couldn't go somewhere else and have success. I don't think he's a terrible coach. He's right in that range where he's not a terrible coach. He's not a terrible guy, but he's also not necessarily, if you're a billionaire trying to build your franchise, or if you're a school like Alabama who's trying to replace Nick Saban, that's not the guy I would put out there and go, hey, you're going to be under some of the most scrutiny of any head coach in NFL or in NCAA football history. Can you deal with that without breaking? I don't know if that's the guy I would put out there. Another texter says, great riff. Yes, great riff from Rebel. I know he's not talking about me just riffing over here, and I think he's talking about Rebel because it is a great riff playing David Bowie all week long. Text line still open, 512-447-3776. Poll of the day is, what is your most hated trade? Any sport, anytime. You tell us what your most hated trade. I told you I really didn't like. I don't know. I have to think harder. I know I should think more about these when I write them down myself. But the Dennis Rodman, Sean Elliott trade was one that I just hated. I wasn't a fan of it as a kid because he got rid of Sean Elliott, and I had Sean Elliott Taco Cabana cups and all that stuff. So I wasn't a fan of that at all. But it ends up that Sean Elliott ends up back because of the kidney thing, and he gets a transplant. That whole story. Dennis Rodman, though, does not work out, and you have the tension with him and Greg Popovich, where Popovich is trying to get him to fall in line, and the whole Jerry Lucas, well, you can dye your hair. What could go wrong with that? So what's your most hated trade? We're asking that. If you got any takes on the NBA trade deadline, who you want your team to get, who you're looking at over there, college basketball, anything in the NFL as well, send that in on the text line, and we're trying to get to everybody before we get out of the show. Do want to also mention for Texans fans, good news, and you never want to celebrate an injury, but the Browns Pro Bowl defensive back Denzel Ward, one of the best defensive backs in football, was injured at practice today. Makes him questionable for the game on Saturday. Could be a big break for C.J. Stroud and the Texans if you take out a Pro Bowl defensive back. And we know huge Texans fans want to show off their defensive back, that Derek Stingley, who was lost because of injuries last year and wasn't the greatest player last season for Texas, and not all his own fault. And then Sauce Gardner comes out, who was picked right after him and has one of the best rookie seasons of a defensive back ever. A lot of people got on them for drafting Stingley instead. Stingley stepped up now. He's a Pro Bowl alternate. Probably should have been on the Pro Bowl, but I think a lot of writers and voters basically weren't watching Texans games for 90% of the season, which I understand, covering sports. If I wasn't a Texans guy, I wouldn't be watching them all season long either. You don't think that this team that has been complete garbage for the last 3 seasons is going to all of a sudden step up and be great. So it is. And before that, they had Bill O'Brien, which we just talked about. So I get why you didn't see that. NFL also announced today that the 4 teams that will be home for the overseas games next year are the Bears and Vikings in Tottenham. In Munich will be the Panthers, and of course in London will be the Jaguars. The Jaguars want to make London their kind of secondary home city. And it's just, you got Jacksonville and London. That's your 2, Florida and England. Just go together. Those 2 places that probably don't like each other very much. Those will be the 4 going. With the international expansion of the NFL, you expect to see that list grow and grow as more teams and more games are added. They want to go to South America as well and add more games for that. It'll be interesting to see what happens going forward there in the NFL. Nate says, how about one Elvis song? We're already past it. It's 512 Friday tomorrow. And you know what? I'm not a hater on Elvis, Nate. I'm not a hater, but I'm also it was not anything I ever really got into. So there's some stuff I can like, but I like people covering it more. And I like the originals that he stole or covered, or I don't want to say he stole them, but were given to him by people that other people were doing and writing. And so I've never been a hugest Elvis fan. I understand his impact on the business. I get all that. But if I'm going to play a rebel and a crazy one. And I think Elvis was crazy not in the way I like crazy. Elvis is crazy in the he's got a lot of guns crazy. And like he's holding all of them at once. Now, you can have guns, but if you're holding them all at once, that kind of crazy, that's kind of Elvis crazy. And David Bowie was crazy that we played a song about Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. And that's kind of the crazier I can get into, to take too many edibles and forget to wear pants kind of crazy. That kind of crazy you can get into. Freak Nasty ATX says, I just thought of something as Cowboys fans. If we lose first round and Jerry fires McCarthy, does he hire Pete Carroll to keep Dan Quinn on as a DC and head coach in waiting? No. And also, Pete Carroll, I believe, is still under contract, and so there's all this stuff that you would have to go through all this red tape to get him away from the Seahawks. But no, there is the Bill Belichick one, though. Apparently, Jerry Jones really likes Bill Belichick. I can't imagine that he would let him buy the groceries, as Bill Parcells once said, that he would let him buy the groceries. But that's somebody that if they lose this week, he's calling Bill Belichick. 100% he's going to call him. We'll get to that. Average Joe most hated trades, Nolan Ryan and George Springer. Yep, I'm with you on those. They couldn't keep George. It was a shame that they didn't want to pay him, but I still like George a lot. How worried should Texans fans be that Sark may go to Alabama? Not worried. I can't say nothing because Bo Davis wasn't going to go and then ended up going, but that was more about coaching his kid and everything else. But I would say not worried. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, wrap the show up, get to finish up your text, 512-447-3776, right here on the Sports Complex in the Horn 1019, AM 1260, the Horn app, and hornfm.com. All right, we got to get out of here. A couple more texts we did get in. My Angels trading Mike Napoli for Vernon Wells and then choosing to trade for Lucas Giolito instead of trading Ohtani. And they had to fuel for the fire. Toronto sent Napoli to the Rangers, and he backed a key figure to their 2011 run. Yeah, I also don't like the fact they didn't trade Ohtani. Hopefully to the knowing what we know now, to the Blue Jays, and maybe he would have stayed and not gone to the Dodgers and helped them just create a dynasty over there. And then this one, this is the best. To me, one of the worst trades of all time is DeAndre Hopkins trade, where they got it basically back in essentially nothing. That's one of the reasons I left being a Texans fan, but I'm back. They're playing on Saturday in the playoffs, and it makes me happy. We'll talk more about it tomorrow and everything else you guys want to talk about in the text line. Thanks for playing along. But until then, be kind, be safe, keep your underwear clean. We'll see you right back here for more on the Sports Complex.